Welcome to Facebook Live to all the viewers sitting out there from California to Pennsylvania. I'm sitting here in my office with Dr. Rothstein, and we're very excited to talk with you about a topic that for me personally is very dear to my heart. And this is with a daughter who has Tourette, is transitioning to adulthood and all the challenges that might bring. What we have done is we asked a number of you to provide questions for us. And so we have a number of questions from the parents' perspective and some of the questions from the young adults' perspective. And these are fears that parents might have, or fears that these young adults might have moving into a job or moving to college, away from this really nice structured environment where they might have their therapist. And now all of a sudden they're on their own and trying to figure out what to do. And so we have a bunch of questions that we want to address, and Dr. Rothstein, who's sitting beside me, is going to, entertain these questions. I'll ask them. He'll sort of answer them. But before that, we ask the questions. What he wants to do is provide sort of a broader perspective about the challenges that we face entering adulthood. So first, I want to say a little bit about myself. I could probably define myself in many ways, but I think for today I want to define myself as the parent of Madeline, who is 22, who decided to go to college, and she's doing her 5th year, and she has had many of the challenges that some of the parents were worried about, and so this is very close to my heart. I've also done a lot of advocacy for Tourette's, both running some workshops as well as doing some side advocacy. And parenthetically, I happen to be a professor. This is kind of a side issue for this topic, and I study parts of the brain that actually are involved in Tourette's. And so from a scientific point of view, I'm very interested, but I'm actually today much more interested in sort of the advocacy and being there for our kids as they transition into adulthood. Dr. Rothstein?
Hi. So, yes, I'm Dr. Anthony Rothstein. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania and at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I started off as a pediatrician and became a child psychiatrist. I work in the space of neurodevelopmental disorders, kids with Tourette's, kids with ADHD, OCD, autism spectrum, learning disabilities, any kind of difference in your nervous system that sets you up to have difficulty. I work across the lifespan, from children right through adulthood. But my area of specialty, something I've really focused a lot on, is what we call emerging adults from the 18 to 28. I'd say the majority of my patients now come to see me because exactly of the challenges of moving from the protection of being at home into the wide open world, and how do you face that, right? So first I'd like to say that I approach all of these issues from a developmental perspective. Life is a series of challenges from beginning with infancy right through till old age, and every time we move through a stage of life, we have to face a new set of challenges, and how do we go about doing that? Adolescence, we know, is an area of a time of really great discovery and finding, all kinds of energy, and your mind opens up to new things. But there's a lot of challenge with figuring out who you are and how to get along with other people. What do you do if you're not getting what you need in life? How do you handle disappointments, things like that? Somehow at some point we think of this next stage, and I think Jeffrey Arnett coined the term emerging adulthood, because it's really not like you don't just pop from adolescence right into adulthood. And in industrial societies, the time it takes to move through adolescence into what we'd finally say, oh, now you're a grown-up. You got a job, you got a career, you got a family, or whatever it is makes you think that you're a grown-up. That period of time from 18 to 28 or even beyond for some people is this time we call emerging adulthood. It's a time of searching for who you really feel you want to be, where you want to devote your life. It's a time of learning a lot about how to be effective with other people and how to advocate for yourself in terms of your needs. It's a time of also taking responsibility. What does it mean to take responsibility for yourself? What does it mean to be on your own 2 feet and getting up every day and regulating your emotional state and keeping the executive functions in line so you get to where you want to go? And that's a challenge for everybody because kids nowadays grow up in families where there's a lot of scaffolding around. I mean, most kids. Some kids grow up in families that aren't providing that for them, but a lot of kids are kind of programmed, right? From the minute they wake up, time they come home, they got to do this, they got to do that, boom, boom, boom. Then they go off to college, and there's no scaffolding there. You're on your own. So that presents immediately the challenge of, well, how do I organize myself? And when you talk to kids in school, the hardest thing for them, there's two challenges when they get to school. One is managing your time efficiently and doing things in a rather kind of predictable way when there's so many opportunities, so many options, so many distractions. And the other is figuring out how to get along with other people who are strangers when you arrive at school. So what I think challenges people with Tourette's and other associated problems are a couple of things that are especially difficult. One is, am I different? Am I going to be rejected or not for just me because I have these differences? Either obvious things like tics or quirky things like, not being able to tolerate certain sounds or needing to do things a certain way, especially feeling anxiety, because the one theme I've learned over the years is that kids who have neurodevelopmental disorders tend to feel a lot of anxiety because they see it's harder for them to do the things that everyone around them is doing. So that, I think, is a big challenge. And then how you cope with the being on your own. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you limiting how much time you spend online? Or are you getting addicted to things that aren't good? And I add to alcohol or weed. Now it's also gaming or other things that are so rewarding. So handling risks, handling your schedule, and being able to be away from home. All of those are hard enough for everybody. It's especially hard when you're someone with Tourette's. And we think that it's good for parents to start to talk to their kids long before they go off to school. And for kids to start thinking about, how am I going to manage, for example, simple thing, am I going to tell people or not, right? Am I going to just keep it to myself? Or will I, and if I start to tell people that I have something called Tourette's, what am I going to say? How am I going to make them comfortable instead of over-explaining isn't so good either. Saying nothing may not be good, but so you got to find that right balance.
Right, and the right time to do it.
And the right time, exactly. And one other thing, there is no cookie cutter single way to get through this. It's sort of like, how do people navigate through life? Well, it depends on where you're trying to go and what things you find when you get there. So we can give kids a map and parents a map, but the map is not the territory. So once you get there, you got to go, map doesn't line up with what I'm seeing. Can I work around what's really here?
Right. So as you're saying that, I'm sort of going back into what I was experiencing as a young parent.
Yeah, sure.
And Maddie was maybe 15 or 16, and we knew that at some point she would start driving, and that's kind of what we focused on, and that in itself seemed like a terrifying experience. And she managed, she went through that, and she did fine. And then there's the looming thing in the future of going to college or going to work. And I want to make sure we talk about school as well as non-school, because I think a lot of our
different paths.
Exactly, and they're both very good paths. And I think for our daughter, one of the questions we had is she even ready to go to school? And so that's one question for you is, let's say a kid thinks they want to eventually go to school. Should they right away, or should they maybe take a year off? And I think certainly in my experience with my daughter, and I've talked to other kids with Tourette's, is that there's a strong push to go to college because all your friends are going to college. That's the right thing to do, and if you're not so sure of who you are, you're going to do what everybody else does. So that's the question for you maybe is, you're a kid and you're 17, 18, should you automatically go to college? Should you automatically get a job? Or is there something in between that you might want to do to sort of help you transition?
Yeah, no, so that's a great and complicated question. So first of all, if you have the academic abilities and or the drive to do school after you're through with high school, some kids are just done. Yeah. In fact, it just took me forever just to get through school. I just want to go and get some skills, become, work for a while and figure myself out. And those, by the way, that itself is also a challenge, because going for a job interview, sticking to a job, getting good at that, that's also part of, emerging adulthood. Requires a similar set of skills as going off to school. Parents need to ask themselves, is my kid not only academically ready, when we generally know that by their grades and how they do on those exams, etc., but are they socially and emotionally ready? Are they ready to take charge of their lives? Right. In fact, I just co-authored a book called The Stressed Years of Their Lives, How to Help Your Kids Survive and Thrive During Their College Years. And it's all about that. It's all about how do you, as a parent, assess your kids' readiness, okay? So let me give you a few pointers on that. First of all, is your kid conscientious? Are they ready to take ownership of what it means to be on their own, whether it's to go off to work or to college? And by conscientiousness, I mean doing what you saying what you mean, and doing what you say, and taking the consequences if things don't work out, instead of like, oh, no, it wasn't me. It's like owning your life, okay? The second is, I would say, interpersonal skills, like, can I get along with people? Am I ready to get along with people? And some parents worry that their kid isn't socially adept enough to go off to college. So you have to be careful and pick a school that is more tolerant of kids who might be a little bit different than a school where you have to be like everybody around you, or you'll be
speaking of choosing for schools, would you recommend something closer by?
Yes,
further away?
I think
we chose further away because Maddie told us,
I want to get there.
If there was a university on the moon, would you want to go? She said, absolutely yes. She wanted to get as far away as possible from her high school. But now, with retrospect, we're looking at it and saying, it would have been nice for us to be able just to drive to her campus. I'm happy to drive 7 hours, but if she's in Colorado, where she is now, I can't.
Yeah.
So I have to fly. So,
so vision, like retrospectively, the 2020 looking back, maybe she wasn't ready. I do think it's important for that conversation to happen, and for parents to say to themselves and their child, supposing things don't work out there, what's plan B going to look like? But maybe parents are convinced, and the kids might be also, that no, I don't have to go that far away. For whatever reason, Maddie wanted to go far away, and you came up with a reasonable idea. Well, maybe that's a fine idea. It doesn't always work out that way, and that's another thing I want to talk about later, is what happens when things don't go as planned, right? Because life is curvy, it's not a straight line.
Yeah.
Okay, but what I think, if parents have a doubt about their kids' readiness, and I was going to mention a few other things, like things like self-management. Can you get up every day on your own and take charge of your day? I had a parent call me whose kid was coming to Penn. This was a month before orientation, and she said, my son's coming to Penn, he's got ADD and he's got other issues, and I heard you're the doctor who runs that program. I said, yeah. She goes, listen, do you guys have a wake-up service? I said, excuse me? She goes, well, do you have a service that wakes kids up? Because my son doesn't get up on his own. Yeah. And I said, we don't, and I actually think that's going to be something you're going to have to talk to him about, because he's going to have to figure out how to do that. Okay, so everything from waking up to getting to bed and doing everything in between, if your kid isn't doing that on their own, and you're getting nervous about this as a parent, I'd say to your kid, I want to see now, middle of your senior year, you got to show me you can manage your life, or else maybe you shouldn't be going off to school. Maybe you need more time to stay at home and go to a local school, commute for a year, or take a gap year if you're not ready. Other things that I think include in the readiness checklist are things like being able to handle risks. I mean, how much drinking or using substances is your kid starting to do? And can you actually get them to reflect on that? Because if they're going too far, and again, people with Tourette's tend to push to the limits when they're getting involved in something, then you've got to think to yourself, this is an issue. We need to get some clarity about this, because it's okay to experiment a little bit, but if you're going too much with it, that's a problem, right? Another issue, I think, is being able to handle disappointment. What happens when things don't go your way? If you're the person with Tourette's, do you give up, or do you keep going? So grit, like Angela Duckworth talks about
Mm-hmm,
grit,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
that's a huge issue. And then being able to be open and being able to say, I need help, right? Because if you're resisting help, if you're stubborn and saying, I can do this myself, that might work for some people.
Yeah.
But for most people, they end up falling through, into some deep dark hole because they didn't see how much they needed help, right? And I worry about those kids the most.
Yeah.
They're the ones who come home either having academic problems, social problems, mental health issues, substance issues. And I would say I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I'm always into learn, and you only and by the way, all of this is through experiential learning.
Right.
So the one message I'd give you all listening here, parents, is that you got to stop being overprotective. You got to stop solving all your kids' problems for them. You got to stop planning everything out and providing so much scaffolding that when that's removed, they don't know which end is up.
Right. Yeah, the one thing that we sort of experience, and I think a lot of parents do, is that when you have a kid with Tourette, is in their teenage years, what is normal bad behavior and what is behavior that's part of Tourette? And how do you, as a parent, navigate that space?
Yeah.
And when do you tell your kid, no, you can't do that? And when do you kind of pull back and say, okay, the kid with Tourette needs to be able to do his or her thing?
Right.
So that's hard, right?
That's also part of, right, that's the complexity here. And I don't want to give any simple solutions to what's really about. It's a case by case, day by day. So if your child is clearly having trouble and needs to do things to soothe themselves, like whatever, pacing, or they need some time on the computer just to decompress. If that's a way of managing stress, and if it's not harmful to them, then you'd rather them go out for a walk, but they'd rather do something different. That's negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
But things like, refusing to do any kind of chores around the house because they're too busy, or telling you, in ways that are disrespectful, they disagree with you. No, that becomes an issue. Parental values need to be conveyed as, hey, this is what we believe in. You may have Tourette's, but it's not. You may have Tourette, but it's not an excuse to not be a good person, right? And I see the same with ADHD. Kids say, oh, I have ADHD, I couldn't do my homework. No, that's not true. Yeah. It was harder for you to do your homework. Maybe we ought to lower the amount of homework, but you still need to do some studying at night. It's not a quote. So it's the difference between saying I have trouble doing something versus using that as an excuse to never try.
Exactly.
And if all 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, they think they know more than their parents. They think we're idiots. Right. They think we're idiots. Oh, you don't know what it's like. I'm on the internet. You don't know what it's like. Blah blah blah. Okay, you know what you say to them? Show me what you're up to. Teach me. Yeah, you're right. I don't know. Well, I want to see what's happening on your Facebook page. Who's that? Who's that?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's none of your business. Oh, yes, it is. Because you're moving into the world, and there's a lot of dangerous things out there in the internet. And I just want to make sure you know how to protect yourself. If you can demonstrate to me that you're using good judgment, I will step back, and I won't watch you so closely. But I think early in the game, when kids are starting to get their smartphones and all, parents have to be very clear what the rules are of usage, and they have to impose limits, because most kids, not just kids with Tourette, most kids don't know how to turn off the phones,
right?
Because it's so tantalizing, it's so addicting, and it is true. It's how they get to see their friends, right? We no longer can live almost in this society without our phones. I had the other day, my phone went on the fritz. I didn't have it for 24 hours.
You felt good after?
Well, I felt good after about 2 or 3 hours of not panicking. I suddenly said, I don't have to keep checking it.
Yeah.
Wow, I can look around. Then it made me realize all those advice that I give other parents and kids, I had to start to do myself.
Yeah.
Limit usage, respect the fact that your brain needs a break. And you as a brain scientist and I as a clinician know that what's probably happening out there without us being able to measure it quite is people are getting overexposed to stimulation and don't have enough downtime.
And so you imagine if it's hard for us, it's going to be so hard for them.
Really hard.
Whether or not they have Tourette's.
Yeah.
And with ADHD and Tourette's, it's even harder. I think that's just really huge.
And so I think it's like, again, dialogue. Make sure your child knows I'm here to help you figure things out. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I am here to say, these are the limits.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to install those because that's my job as a parent. And so when you go back to your daughter, you know, if she was having a bad day and was just really irritable, and you tried to ask her to do something and she screams at you, you could say, okay, I'll tell you what, you learn to regulate, you find a way to get yourself out of that mood you're in. Tell me what you're going to do, and then let's get together when you're feeling a little better and we can have a conversation.
Right.
It's about timing.
Yeah.
And then when they're calmer,
Yeah.
you can say, let's discuss X, Y, or Z,
Right.
And what are you up to and how do you plan to solve that problem? You see, parents have to move away from being directive to being more like coaches, and then being more like people who are like sounding boards. It's a kind of, you move from, this is what you're going to do now, to, hey, what are you planning to do? Can I give you some feedback on what you're planning? To, hey, check back with me when you're done X and Y, and let me see if you need my help. Right? So it's kind of like just taking a systematic step back and seeing how they do. And by the way, parents need to get away from their own perfectionism or their own unrealistic expectations. It takes a lot longer to learn to do this stuff. If you're saying, hurry up, get dressed, and your kid is trying to figure out how to get dressed for themselves, you better plan for that extra time instead of getting mad at them.
Yeah, and
right?
I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's about being realistic.
Right. So, okay, so now let's say I am 18 and I graduate from high school and I want to get a job. And I might get a job close by, or I might get a job maybe a 2-hour drive. What do I do as a young adult with Tourette's to sort of ensure the highest possible success?
Okay, so first things is to make sure that the job you're getting is a job that suits you, that the workplace itself, whatever your actual job is, that the workplace is not a toxic workplace for people who have any kind of differences. So it has to be a friendly place, friendly enough place. Say if it's unforgiving of people who take too long, or if productivity is more important than the human side, I would be aware of that workplace. Similarly, you want a workplace where you as a person can be assigned a mentor or a supervisor, or somebody who gets it, and who, you don't have to necessarily say what you have, like you have Tourette, but who has your best interests at heart, meaning they give you feedback in a positive way rather than yelling at you.
Right.
Okay, so the work and the workplace needs to be something that's to your strengths and or that you enjoy doing. Secondly, you need to make sure that you know how to get up and get going every day and follow the routine, right? That's self-management. Right? Thirdly, your living arrangement needs to be one that you can manage.
Yes.
And if you don't want, living with roommates may be one option, or if you're living on your own, living somewhere where you don't have to drive everywhere to go. Because I think this whole thing of managing all these demands all at once, it's kind of like you want to move up and take one step at a time as you become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And again, being in an environment that has other young people around, so it's not that hard to find places to go socialize, as well as places to go shopping. But you got to learn all those things, right? You got to learn to shop, you got to learn to cook, right? You got to learn to get around, and then I guess the last thing is to be able to define, for that person, what are they hoping to learn in this first 6 months, year, and how are they going to know if they're making progress or not?
Right.
And I think, like we talked about, time management, taking care of your body, sleeping enough, and if you're on medication or you're going for therapy, that's a huge one. I was going to say this isn't right. Why these talks are so important is that a lot of people with Tourette's out there have a tough time finding really good clinicians who get them. So it's really important that we do what we can to make sure we educate other clinicians about the complexity of Tourette, and also the ability for people to define what they want to get out of therapy. In other words, I'm not there necessarily to talk about Tourette. I might just be there to talk about, like, being, on my own for the first time, or trying to get along with people at work. Normal, everyday, growing up issues are the front and center important topics, and you have to find a therapist who understands that and who moves along. I have an interesting young man who's been to see me, and he wanted to really learn how to feel more comfortable socially, but he didn't want to talk about Tourette's or OCD or ADHD. He wanted help with just being able to feel comfortable talking with people. So after he and I talked to some about, we then got him enrolled in a group that for people with social anxiety, and he found it tremendously helpful.
Yeah, and I want to second that, because again, from my personal experience, I think that and a lot of kids suffer through a lot of bullying in middle school and high school because of their tics, and they cannot fit in. As you know, some kids embrace it more than others. Some really don't want to have anything to do with Tourette's.
Right.
And so you grow up as a young adult, and you come as a parent, and you say, maybe you should go see a therapist. And then the first reaction is, I've seen therapists my whole life. I don't want to see another therapist. And then you say, wow, no, this is not about Tourette's or OCD. This is about you.
Finding your identity.
And for us, it worked. It worked quite well. And certainly our daughter found that incredibly useful. And these are sessions where she can only talk about herself. And it's helping her grow a little bit. And this is something that I would really recommend the parents, that you think about that, is that when you send your kid to college, or if they have a job, is maybe you find them a therapist, but you should think of the therapist as like a support network. And so I know that, Maddie tells me, she says, oh, Darcy told me this, and so now I think about my assignments differently. I think about some of the decisions I make in a very different way. And that has nothing to do with Tourette's. It's really about growing up as a young adult.
That's the hallmark of a really good therapist, that the person feels that the person gets me, that they can help me figure out my life, they can help me figure out what I want to do with my time, how I want to handle relationships, and most of all, figure out, like, what do I really want in life? Because that's the burning question for young adults, for emerging adults, is what do I really want to do with my life? And do I have the skills I need? And if not, how do I get those skills? And therefore, I use a learning framework. It's a time for learning, and therapy is one of them. It's like individualized instruction on life learning. And that means Maddie's got a good resource, like you said. It's part of her support network, and it's somebody she's listening to and applying the conversations and what she's learning to life.
Right. So one other question, one of the young adults reached out and was a little bit concerned, and this is a broader topic, and we probably cannot cover everything. Sure. This is about relationships, and then eventually maybe parenthood. And so there's a concern. I have Tourette's. I've heard that it's a heritable disease or disorder, and so there's a chance that my kids might have Tourette's as well. And so I have some thoughts too about this. What are your thoughts that you would tell this person?
Well, why don't you start with you?
So I have a friend of mine who had Tourette's, and he is a young child, and it seems like his son is starting to show early signs of Tourette's. It's not clinical yet, but he's pretty sure it is. And what I would tell this person is that as a person with Tourette's, so first of all, the genetics are really complicated. The likelihood of your kid having Tourette's is higher than if you didn't have Tourette's, but it doesn't mean your kid will have Tourette's. But
so it's not an automatic.
It's not an automatic. But I would say that as a parent with Tourette's, you're in a unique position to understand your kid and create the environment at home and advocate for your kid in the school of what it feels like. And you can provide your child with what you wished you had had as a young teenager. That's what I would tell them.
Really good. That's a good point. The other thing I'd say is, generally, having a kid is a wonderful but demanding experience. So you have to be ready to be up for it.
Yes.
Like putting in the time, learning not to get too frustrated or too freaked out, going with the flow a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that Tourette, as a parent who has kids, if you have Tourette's as a parent and your kid has it, yes, you understand them better in some ways, but you also may feel more guilty or more upset when they're encountering difficulties. And I think that's why having help for yourself as a parent is a good idea, because then you can talk about your stresses and think about what would be the best way to handle this situation so that you don't over-identify with your child and then either become, again, overprotective, over-anxious, and then convey to the child more anxiety than the child needs. It's an interesting, one of the points we make in our book is that over the last 40 years, parenting in the United States has become much more focused on control and making sure your kid is safe. Because I think the world feels more dangerous, because there's a lot of uncertainty, globalization, climate change, lots of negative stuff in the 24/7 world. Mm-hmm. And we think that parents are feeling very vulnerable, and then they're conveying their anxiety to kids. So that's why we think there's been a rise in young people of anxiety disorder and depression. It's almost like in the atmosphere. And those who are most sensitive, like people with Tourette's, they'll absorb it even more, and it's harder to let it go. It's harder to move away. So if you're going to have a kid with Tourette, you got to be ready to deal with your own anxiety about parenthood, which a lot of it is just what I would call average, normal anxiety, along with the extra fear that you have, knowing how hard it was for you. And so that, I think, is something to talk about with the partner that you're going to have a child with, and making sure that you don't project too much of your anxiety and let your kids start to figure it out, right? What was most helpful? And also good to think about, well, what helped me the most when I was growing up? Right. Well, number one, it's having people who support me, who accept me, and who don't just look at me as a problem or as a patient, and who just can see beyond the symptoms and just say, that's a good person. They got a lot of talent. And think about how to develop those talents, kind of strengths-based approach. So I think I would say to that parent, well, first of all, take your gifts, take what you've learned as a person who's a little neuroatypical, but the world needs people like that. It makes the world a richer place.
They do.
And if you can convey that sense of feeling self-esteem or self-efficacy, and say, you know what, I'm a person who's not only survived it, but I'm thriving, and I think I can, if I bring a child into the world, they'll be able to do something good with their lives too.
Right. So, obviously, before you get to that stage, you have to become intimate with somebody.
That's right.
That's a big concern with these young adults, or actually even high school, is like, so it's easy to make a friend and maybe have a date, but then at some point, you might be afraid that they can see right through you because you have Tourette's. And so at what point do you tell them you have Tourette's, and how do you say it, and how much do you kind of divulge to that person?
Well, first of all, I would say that it takes a lot of practice to learn how to do this, right? You can rehearse all you want, but until you get out on the stage, and you may blow your lines, it may not go well the first time. So I always tell my patients who are starting to date, I say, well, what do you feel most comfortable doing? Because you got to start with what you're most comfortable with. Right. Some of them say, I'd rather not say anything and let it just come up. I said, fine, because that, as long as you're not feeling like, oh, I'm really doing something wrong, which you're not, you're free to choose how you want to present yourself, right? And the other thing is, if this person seems like there's somebody who you like and who likes you, and things are clicking, then whenever the time is right, you might begin to say, well, you may notice that I have some tics, and it's not a big deal, but I just thought I'd let you know that I have tics. Right. And then downplay it, okay? Because you want to say enough that says, I'm comfortable with this, and I'm comfortable with you because I like you. But you don't tell the whole story of how you were bullied or what you're freaked out about until you really get to know them better, okay? So it's kind of like you reveal layers as you go, and if this person is an accepting person, you'll pick that up. And if they're not, then you're better off, not being with them. I mean, finding a good partner is finding someone who you not only have fun with or feel you have common interests with, but someone who gets you, who kind of can accept you. And you have to do the same, by the way. I think the interesting side of the story that people with Tourette may not realize is many of them are very perfectionistic or have to be a certain way, and they don't like someone if they didn't do something the right way. And you gotta say, hey, be a little forgiving of them if you want them to be forgiving of you.
Yeah, that's true.
Like the forgiveness thing goes a long way with making new relationships. And finally, I would say, it's kind of like that whole idea of practice makes perfect. I mean, although I'm not into perfectionism, I do think being willing to make mistakes when trying to fix them. So you said something stupid. So you weren't necessarily on your best game. So what?
Yeah.
Like,
that happens to people that don't have Tourette's too. Right?
Exactly. I can tell you lots of stories of dates that didn't go well, and forget it. You know, I thought it was going to go well, and I blew it.
Right.
But you know, we all have that, and I think in today's world, sometimes kids put a lot of pressure on themselves. And I would urge any of you that are thinking about dating right now, look at yourself, look at it as a kind of explore it like a world that you don't know, and just try it out. And if it doesn't go well the first time, it's not the end of the world. You learn from it and try to say, okay, what do I need to do next time to be a little more comfortable? Because the more comfortable you are with who you are, the more comfortable you'll be with others. It's sort of a, and I do think having someone to talk about it with, maybe an older sibling, some friend of yours, who can coach you if you're nervous. But I don't think there's any formula for finding success in that area. And some of it, as the research shows, some of it is luck. You happen to go to a party and someone came up to you and you hit it off. How many times have you heard that? Or now online, through the online dating system. You know, lots of people are just finding each other after lots of tries. They hit the good one. So it's like I would say, don't stay back. Don't avoid. That's the other thing I worry about. People think, oh, I'm not ready yet. Right. And I always say, how are you going to know if you're ready till you try?
I've seen that.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much time we have, but I wanted to just touch upon one topic is that we talked about sort of the workforce, and then the other one is going to go into college.
Yeah, the role of parents.
More the type of support you can get in college, and I'll talk a little bit just as a teacher. I know that there is a department at every university called the Student Disability Service, and you know some students are fine with it, and you know you talk to people in the Student Disability Service and say this is a horrible name, and we all know it, and we can't change it, and so you know there are kids that have Tourette's that might say I don't have disability, I have some challenges, but I don't have a disability. I don't want to go to that office, and what I would tell to you guys if you're interested is that go to that office. The people that are there, they're so accommodating, so understanding, and I cannot tell you how easy it is to get extra help. You can take your exams in a separate room and you can have 50% more time. And just as a perspective from a professor, I don't know who those students are that need extra time or not. It just kind of happens. And most importantly, your classmates in that class will have no idea. They would just focus on their exam, and Megan or Brenda or Mark are just not there, and they're taking their exam in a different room. And if you have issues with someone chewing or someone's breathing, as my daughter said, oh my God, Dad, your breathing is so loud. You know, you'll be in a room by yourself, and you don't have to worry about it. And it's really simple, and it's hugely helpful. And for your academic performance, I think it's very helpful. And I would also then recommend that, you know, when you're in college, work with your parents, try to find maybe a therapist who can be your support person. And I completely agree with Dr. Rothstein. We said that in the context of finding a job, but if you can, choose living arrangements and roommates that are supportive. Sometimes certain roommates can be completely toxic for your condition. In college, you might need more sleep than they do, and all of a sudden you have roommates that are up till 3 in the morning, and maybe they're drinking and you don't want it, you're trying really hard, and it's just, you know, try to find, it's not easy, but try to find your friends and who you're living with to be the supportive type.
Well, you bring up something really important. So the most important challenge, if any kind of difference, is to accept that difference and to not let it stop you. So if you have a learning difference and you could benefit from assistance of any kind, accommodations, tutoring, special rooming, or whatever, it takes courage, but it's important to learn to advocate for yourself and not to shy away from that, okay? And advocating for yourself means saying, hey, this is what I need, and not being afraid to ask for it, number one. And the other thing we talk about is self-stigma, which is sort of like, it's bad enough that the world stigmatizes people who are different. You don't want to stigmatize yourself for having differences. You want to learn to accept those, and so self-acceptance, I would say, is a prerequisite for being able to deal with life's curveballs. You know, like, think about this. Baseball players strike out or are out like most of the time, okay? Your best average is 300, so 3 out of 10 times. So 7 out of 10 times, batters in baseball have to, they ground out, they fly out, they strike out. How do they live with themselves? Well, they learn to accept the fact that, hey, I'm going to mess up most of the time, but I'm going to try anyway. So learning that you are different, but that doesn't mean you're less than others, is, I think, the most important. Self-acceptance and avoiding self-stigma, or the belief that because something is different about me, that therefore I'm somehow bad, broken, not able to succeed in life. And I think that way, all those
things, I think the self-acceptance is a key sort of transition into adulthood.
It really is.
For everybody, but
everybody. And
it
turns out that and there have been some really good studies of self-acceptance and self-compassion for self. Those are among the best predictors of successful adjustment to college or to adulthood. Is that being able to say, I may have faults, but I'm all right. As opposed to, I have faults and I don't want anybody to see them and I can't deal with them myself. Right. We coined a term, you may have remembered this, we did a report a few years back after a number of kids at Penn killed themselves, and it was horrible, and we were all very worried about this. And when we talked to the students here, they all talked about the Penn face. You've got to look good, you got to feel good, look good, act like everybody's, show them all the smiley faces, right? That's not real. We all have down periods. We all have times when we're like grumpy or don't feel like doing things. And so we encountered that this was important for young people to realize, that all of this Facebook happy times, that's just one aspect of life. You shouldn't measure yourself against everyone else. Right? Find your own center and deal with who you are first. And then, that way you'll be able to accept it when things don't go well, or when it's harder than you expected to get something done, and then you don't feel like down on yourself, because it's the getting down on yourself for that I think you gotta learn. You gotta learn to not be so down on yourself when things are hard, and that way you'll be able to bounce back more quickly. So that's what resilience is all about. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. Remember that song, I get knocked down but I get up again? That song, for me, is emblematic of resilience, and I know lots of people with Tourette who really are resilient human beings.
They're incredibly resilient. Amazing, I think that's a strength that they have that other kids don't.
Right,
other
because they've had to figure things out, and they've had to work around this stuff. So they're incredibly creative. They just you may not realize this about yourself, but if you're listening to this show and you have Tourette, you have gifts that you got to appreciate.
Yeah. So I think we're probably running out of time. So I just want to say one quick thing is that. There are several programs in either local Tourette's associations. So we're in Pennsylvania here, and the Pennsylvania Tourette's Alliance does advocacy, not just for high school kids, but will also help young adults, whether in college or starting new jobs, and would teach them about sort of the professionalism and how to navigate sort of that new experience. And then there's also a program from the National Tourette's Association called Rising Leaders Program. It's for individuals between 18 and 25. And again, it's the same idea. It's a continuation of the Youth Ambassador Program, where they really focus on sort of personal and professional development. And so you might want to look at the website and find out. So there's as Dr. Rothstein mentioned, there's a growing awareness that this is a gap in our understanding. We know how to treat young kids pretty well. As they get to high school, we sort of still know how to do, but it's harder to reach out. Certainly the parents have a harder time reaching out. But then once they're on their own, they're not adults yet, but they still need the help. So I'll end with that, and I'll wish all of you really good luck. You guys are amazing individuals, and the parents are amazing too. So just closing remarks maybe?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I salute all of you and the courage that you have to live with Tourette, but learning to live well, taking care of yourselves, making sure that you appreciate your gifts, and if things are hard, having someone to talk to, and having someone, if you need meds, making sure they know how to manage the meds with you so that you're really doing the best that you can to manage the challenges of Tourette's and enjoy the gifts that it brings as well.
And so if you want to learn more, just go to Tourette.org. This is the website for the National Tourette Association, and you can find this Facebook Live and a number of other Facebook Lives that the organization does.